Good evening and welcome to the Piano Man, starring David Benjamin, where David tells classic piano, fresh puns, all performed live. And now, without further ado, please welcome your host, Mr. David Benjamin. Hello, everybody. I think I'm on my camera over here. Let me just bring up Zoom and make sure that is, in fact, the camera. Yes, it is. And it just gave me a thumbs up, I think, or gesticulation of some sort. Thought I'd start the evening off with something that has absolutely nothing to do with anything else I'm playing tonight. That was out of a set of short little pieces I wrote ostensibly for Amanda's piano students, who were mostly about this tall. And she told me at some point in there that I was writing stuff that was way too hard for little kids to play. So I just gave up on that idea and thought, I'm just going to write these short form little pieces. I called them all preludes. That one was entitled Humoresque, which is a title used in mostly romantic period times. Like Rachmaninoff used it, a few other composers used it, and it's usually just a lighthearted short little piece that does some unexpected things. I thought it'd be a fun one to start off with. So tonight, what I wanted to play, I've been wanting to play some sonatas, movements, or they're multi-movement pieces of music usually, and they use a specific form of music. I've been wanting to share those for a while, and I thought that it might be instructive and helpful, and people might get more out of it if I explain what exactly a sonata is, what goes into it, why some of these pieces are considered just brilliant pieces of music. So first off, what I want to do, and I've got Amanda monitoring the chat for me, so if anybody has questions or says anything, if it's something important, then I'll put my phone up here so hopefully I can kind of keep an eye on things too. So first, what I want to start off with is defining some terms that I will probably use later on. So non-musicians out there, you know what I'm talking about. First of which, and my iPad's over here, I've got some notes written down. So the first term is a musical key. C major is all the white keys on the piano. That's what C major sounds like. G major is a different key. You can probably hear the relationship between the notes. In other words, how much space there is between each note is the same. It starts on a different pitch. One starts here, one starts up here. So there are different keys in music. They have different feels, different flavors, so to speak. C major tends to sound very happy. E flat minor, on the other hand, very dark sounding key. So composers, are aware of this, and it's one reason why they might choose to write a piece in a certain key, is to achieve a certain sound. Obviously, if I play, that has a certain sound to it, but then this it's obviously the same thing, but it has a very different sound because it's bumped up several pitches. And relatively speaking, the whole piece could be moved up or further down the keyboard, depending on what key it's in. Singers do this kind of transposition. It's what it's called when you move a piece of music from one key to another. They do this all the time. If the song doesn't fit comfortably in their vocal range, they might move it up a couple of notes or down a couple of notes, so it fits more comfortably in the range that they sing.
People say they could use more volume on your voice.
More volume on the voice. How's this? It's probably picking up I have a fan going because it's, hot. Okay, how's that, guys? Is that better? Better. Okay. So, musical key. It's sort of the tonal center around which the whole piece revolves. It may be here, it might be here, could be there, and it's usually pretty clear from the opening of the piece where it's going to be sitting, where it's going to be centered. There's relationships between the keys, and funnily enough, the further you go away physically from a key on the keyboard, the closer those keys are related. In other words, C major is very closely related to G major. It's a G major chord, it's a C major chord. When I'm playing the notes on the keyboard, the only difference between C major and G major is I play this black key here. I don't know if you can see it, but I play this black key here instead of this white key, and I start up here instead of down there. So there's relationships between the keys, and when a composer writes a piece in a certain key and they modulate from one key to another during the course of the piece, they're usually modulating to keys that are related. So it's an easy modulation to go from C major to G major. It's much harder to go from C major to F sharp. You can hear how different that sounds. Or from C major to C sharp major. Even though they're very close on the keyboard, it's harder to do, and it's not done as frequently. And I'll get into a little bit more of that later. The last terminology I want to kind of define at the outset here is musical theme. I kind of think of themes as being like a paragraph in something that you're reading. For instance, the first piece I'm going to play tonight starts off. That's a theme. It's fairly simple. It's pretty self-contained. There's also a motif, which I'm not going to get into as much because the pieces I'm playing tonight don't really use motif, but motif can be thought of as kind of like a catchphrase. It's this, something like that, or probably the most famous motif in the history of music. It's the opening of Beethoven's Fifth. Beethoven made the motif a theme, which was unheard of at the time, and that is probably the most famous motif. So theme or phrase tends to be longer. It's kind of a complete musical thought. And so the way sonatas are built, to get into this a little bit, they are in three main sections. The first of which is the exposition. The exposition effectively has all of the material that the composer is going to be working with contained in it. Typically consists of a first theme, and so forth. Then there will be kind of a transition passage. In the case of this first piece I'm playing, after it goes, it then does. And it transitions from, or modulates from here to here in the process. And the second theme is now in a new key, and the composer uses this key change as modulation to contrast, to make it sound different. An exposition, depending on the length and complexity of the piece, it can have more themes than that. Some of them have 3 themes, some only have 2. Some have technically 3 themes. I think a couple of the ones I'm playing tonight actually have what sound like 3 themes, but really the first one is in one key, and then the rest of them in the exposition are in this other key area. And then I'll get into a little bit more detail maybe on what some of these pieces are doing before we play each one. So that's the exposition, all the thematic material. It's kind of like the introduction, if you will, to an essay. Following that is a development section, and in the development section, the composer is really pretty free to do whatever they want. Let's see. Just check the chat here, make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, yeah, I don't do simple. I go full on, and full on complicated right out the gate. Development section, the composer can kind of do whatever they want. So usually what ends up happening is they'll take the theme and they'll break it down into bits, or not the theme, but the themes they presented in the exposition. They'll break it down into bits and pieces and rework it and do stuff with it. Sometimes composers will use some of the modulation or transition material it's in between themes, and they'll play around with that. So they're really free to do stuff, do interesting things with the thematic material that they've developed and presented in the exposition. Following the development, and oftentimes the oftentimes the development will sound like the beginning of the exposition. It's going to sound like you're hearing the first theme again, but then it goes off in a totally different direction. Following the development section is what's called the recapitulation. It's usually in a strict sonata form. It's pretty much exactly what you heard in the exposition, just with some alterations. So instead of getting a modulation going from here to here, everything, all those themes stay in the same key. They're all presented in that same key, and it sounds more resolved that way. Let's see, and with sonatas, there's no length limitation. So what you're going to hear, the first couple that I'm playing, are actually very short pieces. They are written by composers who, sort of straddled the 18th and 19th centuries. They're earlier on in the development of the sonata form, and there's just not as much to them. And then when we get into some of the Beethoven, they're a lot bigger, a lot beefier pieces of music. Let's make sure that there's... So the first piece I'm playing tonight is a short sonatina by a guy named Friedrich Kuhlau. He was a Danish composer. He lived during the same time period as Mozart and Beethoven. He was born, I think, in the 1750s, died in the 1830s. And I think he would probably be better known today. He lost a lot of his unpublished, well, all of his unpublished compositions in a house fire. He had around 200 works published that have survived. He was known as an opera composer, but he was a piano virtuoso and wrote a lot of piano music as well. And piano was a really newfangled instrument back then. So this is just a short little sonatina, pretty compact, but it has all these elements I've been describing. It's got that exposition with the couple of themes. It's got a short development section where he kind of plays around with the themes a little bit. And then it's got the recapitulation where you hear the exposition material again, but it's modified to all stay in the same key. So without further blathering, I will play this piece for you guys. All right, so that is a short sonatina movement by Kuhlau. Like I said, these pieces, everything I'm playing tonight is a multi-movement piece of music, meaning following that, if I was playing the entire thing, there would be a slow movement. And so forth, contrasting with what you just heard at the beginning. Uh, but since I'm focusing on the sonata form, I'm playing all the sonata form movements from these various pieces of music. So, and as you probably, I mean, I'm sure all of you out there at some point or other have heard music by Mozart. I will be playing at least one of his pieces tonight. And yeah, that what we just heard sounds a lot like Mozart. It was fairly common for the time. As is the next piece I'm playing by a guy named Muzio Clementi, who lived about the same time period as Kuhlau, 1750s to 1830s. And incidentally, that's roughly the same time period as Beethoven. I think was born in the 1770s and died around 1828 or 1827, somewhere in there. Mozart was born in the 1750s, died, as most of you probably know, very young in the 1790s. So these first two composers really are same time period as Mozart and Beethoven, but these couple of pieces are much simpler. So this one, again, is sonata form. Its theme is much more sprightly, much more active. It's kind of a fun little piece. And the let's see. Looking for where the second theme starts. It's not quite as clear in this one, but there's a couple of themes in the exposition. And so you just heard me play this. That's the theme. The development starts off with so you can hear it's got some similarities, but it's suddenly going in a new direction. You know, he's kind of implying a minor scale here, and it takes it totally in a totally new direction. Then eventually the main theme returns back in the home key, in this case G major, and we're back in familiar territory in the recapitulation. Hopefully this is making some sense to people. I don't know. This is a form that I tried to compose in when I was in high school. Had no idea what I was doing. I'd never taken a music theory class in my life. Didn't have a clue. And it wasn't until I actually majored in music. It wasn't until I had that musical education and actually studied this stuff that it finally I started to get what this form was all about. Now it's a form I really like composing in. And the advantage of using a set form like this is it gives you kind of a structure to build a piece on. There's certain things that happen at certain places. You're not just winging it the whole way through. So this sonatina is by Clementi, also fairly short. And you'll hopefully hear some similarities between this and the one I just played in terms of how it's constructed. You'll hear that opening theme, you'll hear a transition, you'll hear a different musical theme happen. I forgot to mention earlier that the exposition is often repeated. So you get to the end of the exposition, then you go back and play it again, and then you go into the development and then the recapitulation. So this is Sonatina, for those keeping track of those sorts of things, Opus 36, number 5 by Clementi. I hope you guys like that. It's kind of a fun little piece, and one that I decided this afternoon to add to the program. I had not actually played that piece in a very long time. And so hopefully you heard, at the very least, when this comes back after the development section, which ends on this, on that little gesture. Let's see who's in the. I actually haven't even checked the chat yet to see who all is here. I see Chris and Serona. Hi guys, and Pam. Hi Pam, and hi Mom. And I think I see something about Barbara being here too. So hi Mom-in-law. And what, hon?
Hi, my dad.
Oh, hi Steve. Pa-in-law. Yeah, that works. Pa-in-law. Hi Christina. Let's see who else is. Oh, hi Anna. Glad you're here. And Kathy B. Hello, hello. Okay, well, I'm not going to sit here and scroll back through the entire thing because you're not here to see me scroll through a chat.
Angelica.
Oh, Amanda just told me Angelica's here too. Hi, Angelica. Oh, and my dad apparently is here too. Hi, Dad.
Did you say hi to Kathy?
I did say hi to Kathy. So this next piece that I'm going to play is we're moving on to Mozart, so we're getting a little bit heftier, and that's not to say Kuhlau and Clementi, they did write longer sonatas than the two I just played. I just was picking a couple short ones to start with that are a bit simpler, easier to hear the different things that are going on. This is another one I actually decided to add this in today. I haven't played it in a long time, so hopefully I'll do okay. But I think it's a more interesting piece than the one I had originally planned on playing. So this one is written, the first one was written in C major here, that piece by Kuhlau. The one I just played by Clementi is written in G up here. This next one by Mozart is written in F major, just centered around here. And what you'll hear in this one is the initial thematic material. Very much in F major. The second theme is in C major, related key, and more or less stays in C major actually for quite a while, up until the end of the exposition, which is then repeated. The development section is really kind of a continuation of material that's presented in the exposition. I wouldn't say so much that he's heavily reworking thematic material that he presented. He's just kind of, I don't know, it feels like he's kind of extending stuff that he presented. And then, of course, when you hear the opening theme again, you'll know you're in the recapitulation, and you can expect to hear a slightly different transition passage in between themes, but more or less you're hearing what was what happened in the exposition. Let's see if there's anything else. I don't think there's anything else I desperately wanted to say about this one, but it's a piece I've played off and on for a lot of years. It's real pretty. It's Mozart. He wrote really pretty stuff. But I don't recommend listening to a lot of Mozart in a row because it all starts to sound the same after a while, and then I think you kind of lose your appreciation for it. I made that mistake with his piano concertos. It was like, ugh, after about the third or fourth one. Oh, apparently my graphic says my show started at 8. Yeah, sorry guys. But we decided to go with an earlier start time because I wanted to give this one, I actually don't really know exactly how long it's going to take, but I figured between my talking and playing longer pieces, it might be a couple hours. So we're scheduled till 9, hence the earlier start time. And yes, Diane, I'm glad you're on YouTube already and that you saw that this was running. Yeah, sorry guys, I did not notice that the graphic that went out had the 8 p.m. start time. Didn't catch that. What, Amanda?
The link says 7.
Oh, the link says 7 apparently.
The picture on the link says
Oh, huh. Okay, so there must be another one floating around that had the 8 p.m. start time. Anyways, we'll get our act together next show. That actually, Sam, can we have like a bumper sticker made of that? We'll get our act together next show, or maybe a T-shirt. Chris, if you want to design a shirt around that, go for it. So anyhow, this next piece is this is sonata by Mozart. It's number 12 out of I think he wrote about 18 or 19 sonatas for piano. So it's kind of right in the middle. He was probably in his 20s when he wrote it, given that he died in his mid 30s. Um, and yeah, so just as a reminder, this is the theme. The let's see, where's the second theme is this. And there's more to each of those than just those snippets, but those are kind of the snippets to listen for. There is a third theme in this one. It's also in C major. That's a third theme, and there's little bits that he does with that. And then the development section is when you hear. Kind of think of that as, if this is orchestrated, that would be like a something maybe like the brass section would play. That's kind of what I hear in my head when I play this piece. So anyhow, here's the sonata opus, or sorry, not opus, he didn't have any opus numbers. Kürzel number 332, sonata number 12 in F by Mozart. just saw something in the chat just as I was finishing that something's been decided, but I'm not sure what yet. What has been decided? Uh,
Hunter's parents and my parents both went to Germany
uh-huh.
and went like through some salt mines and then to a beer area. And
A
it was
beer
before,
area.
yeah, I forget what it's called.
Oh, this is
but,
getting
like,
better.
Yeah, and then I'm looking up something else right now. So it was before Hunter was born. My parents went before I was born. So that's it. We're all going.
All right. Well, my dad went to Germany too. He was an exchange student in college, and he lived there for a year. So yeah, I want to go. And to Austria, as I saw something about Salzburg in there. Oh, yeah. My mom says that my dad just pointed out that Mozart's piano would not have had as many keys. Yes, and that is actually something that is worth mentioning. If you've ever wondered, which maybe I'm probably the only one who's wondered this, honestly, but the reason why, or a reason why classical period pieces, in other words, 18th century, early 19th century, a lot of them are written in really only using a few of the keys on the keyboard, meaning like they're in C major, or they're in F major, or they're in G major. And they tend to be higher pitched, and they tend to sit kind of up here on the keyboard or here. They don't tend to hit these low notes as much. And when they do, I mean, you could hear in that Mozart piece I just played, this would have sounded pretty revolutionary, that this passage. That bit would have, yeah, people didn't write music like that back then, not the way Mozart did. And using these lower keys, this stuff down here on the keyboard, he was bottoming out the keyboards of the time. They stopped. Oh, I want to say they, like around here somewhere was the lowest note. On a modern grand, the lowest note's way the heck down there. So that's something that has really changed, especially during the 19th century. Pianos were undergoing a lot of development in the 19th century, and one of the major developments was the expansion of the keyboard. It did not used to be as big as it is on a modern grand. In fact, there used to be some pianos in Liszt's time period, so mid to late 19th century, that added another several notes on the bottom end of the piano beyond what a normal modern grand has. And they weren't there so much to be played directly as they were, and you could, Liszt wrote some pieces that used those notes, but they were really there to provide extra resonance. It actually made these notes in here clearer sounding to have those extra strings, but it never really caught on. Those bigger pianos went by the wayside, and we have the modern grand now. So yeah, it's thank you, Dad, for pointing that out, because it's an interesting aspect to keep in mind when you're hearing stuff that's written really early on, 17th century, early 18th century, or sorry, 18th century, yeah, I said that right. Late 1700s, early 1800s. I'll not try and say the centuries thing anymore. I just confuse myself. There were developments that the piano underwent later on that they just didn't have back then. So you never hear a Mozart piece like using notes way down here, because those notes didn't exist on the keyboard. And the notes that were down there, these lower notes, were muddier sounding. It was, you hear this. Believe it or not, that's the same thing as that, just a lot lower pitched. But it's kind of hard to tell that that's a major happy, quote-unquote, chord versus minor. There's not a whole lot of difference, but you play it up here, you can clearly hear a difference between the two. So there's a lot of reason why why composers didn't tend to use the lower end of the keyboard much in the 1800, early 1800s, because it just didn't sound very good. And kind of same rationale why you don't hear really much in the way of Mozart that's written in this key area. You'll hear this, but you don't hear that. And again, it's because of the way pianos were tuned back then. Some of those keys, especially the ones that start on black notes, just didn't sound that great. so they didn't tend to get used. That started to change in Beethoven's time. And by the time the 1830s, 1840s rolled around, pianos were sounding much closer to what a modern grand sounds like. Pam says something about harpsichord. I don't know if there's context to that. Amanda, do you know if there was context to that comment?
Oh, I answered. She was asking if the music was on a harpsichord, and I said that in the later part of his career, it was actually keyboard piano music and not harpsichord music, except for a lot of the operas used.
Yeah, well, it was common in Baroque times, time of Johann Sebastian Bach, so 1600s to mid 1700s. It was very common in those time periods for part of an orchestra was a harpsichord, and a harpsichord, as some of you might know, you can't really see it in the piano here, but when I hit a key on a piano, there's a hammer that kicks up and physically hits the strings in there. So you can do things like control your volume depending on how hard you hit the key. That corresponds to how hard the hammer hits the string. A harpsichord, these had a similar mechanism as a piano, but the strings were plucked. They weren't hit. And so you had a little bit of volume control with a harpsichord. You had more control with harpsichords that had multiple keyboards to them. But some of those, like one keyboard would be plucking sets of 2 or 3 strings, and the other keyboard would be plucking 1 or 2 strings at a time. So you get a little bit of volume difference there. But there wasn't as much that you could do with it. And a harpsichord has a very specific sound. It's a little bit more buzzing than that of a piano. So yes, Mozart did write some stuff for harpsichord. But really, the piano had been, as we currently know, with hammers hitting the strings, that had been invented actually before Johann Sebastian Bach died in the 1750s. So Bach wrote some music for those very, very early, newly invented pianos. And he got to play around with being able to change your volume, which on an organ or harpsichord you can't do, at least as far as hitting keys more gently versus hitting them harder. And then, like I said, as we get into Beethoven, Beethoven is well known for breaking strings on his pianos because he would hit keys so hard, and pianos weren't nearly as robust back then. Beethoven would have been very, very happy with a modern grand piano. Let's see what else. So speaking of Beethoven, I'm gonna get into some Beethoven now. So how are we doing on? Okay, we still have about an hour. Good. So this next piece I'm going to play, there's a couple of Beethoven sonata movements, I should say, not the entire multi-movement piece of music. A couple of Beethoven sonatas that I wanted to play tonight. The later composed one I'm actually playing first. I think it's a little bit simpler in construction. So this one, it's kind of interesting because it's written in the key of E flat, which sounds like that. Okay. Closely related keys would be B flat. You can hear that, and then well, F major is not really close, but it's close. So that's the key area that we're in is this. But where he starts the piece, I mean, what is that? It's this weird thing where you don't even have an E flat major chord in there. It's not really leading anywhere. But then he does this, and then there's the E flat major, and then he does that. So it's really kind of an interestingly written piece. It doesn't really sound a whole lot like much else that was written at the time. At least as far as usually when you have a sonata or any other piece, the key it's written in is pretty clear and unambiguous, and this is just like what the. Now the second theme is very clearly in the related key. So we start in E flat major. Second theme is in B flat major here. So that's pretty unambiguous. and it continues on a bit. You know, he kind of extends out that theme, that key area. The development section, as I mentioned before, when I said developments, oftentimes that they'll sound like the beginning of the piece again. Development section starts off with that, but then instead of doing this, he does this. So far similar, bit beefier chords. At the beginning, he goes, right? In the development, he does this. And all of a sudden, whoa, we're in new territory here. And that kind of spurs on the rest of the development section. And he plays around with the thematic material presented at the beginning of the piece. And then eventually the recapitulation starts off with kind of a modified first theme. It's this so what he's doing is he's moving it from being sitting down here to being up here. He kind of changes the sound of it a bit. And something you'll hear in this piece, as you heard, I don't know if anybody noticed, in the Mozart piece, those transition sections I talked about that change the key in between thematic material. Sometimes a composer will modify the transition in the recapitulation so it stays in the same key. Sometimes they'll modify it by making it shorter. That Mozart sonata I just played modified it by making it longer, kind of continuing the pattern through an extra few series so it lands where he wants it to. And I think in this piece, Beethoven did the same thing, where that transition passage is a little bit longer than what we heard the first time around. And there's a couple of passages. There's a passage of some faster notes where in the recapitulation he extended that passage a little bit compared to the beginning of the piece. So what you hear with this one is we're getting into territory where this piece is much heftier. There's a lot more emotion in it. Something that was typical of 18th century classical period music was that a lot of it was written as background music. Yeah, it could be played in a concert hall, but it was really, a lot of it was intended to be lighter entertainment. So occasionally you hear Mozart getting kind of doing that a little bit, but then those sort of dark moments lighten up almost immediately. Beethoven, that's not really the case. The dark is kind of the point. So this is one of his happier sounding pieces, the Sonata Opus 31, number 3. It is the 18th piano sonata he wrote out of 32, so roughly halfway through his sonatas in E flat major. And I just saw my mom comment something about Elizabeth, my sister's name, Elizabeth, with no shortening. So I think that's true. She doesn't use Crisco. So
Did you see
good.
my comments?
I didn't see Amanda's comment. No, I just caught this one random
So
thing.
I didn't want to bother you because you're about to start playing.
Oh.
But I said yes, no shortening is allowed, and then I said insert baking pun here.
Ah.
And I was gonna ask you to make a baking pun, but you were gonna start playing, so I didn't.
Well, if you want to go get me some soda, I can make a baking pun.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys heard that, but that got an from my dearest love over there on the couch. Such is my life. All right. Here we go. Beethoven. that little Beethoven. And there's a new element that I, of course, neglected to point out because I didn't actually write any of this stuff down, which I should have before I started the show. The new element here was in the first few examples that we heard. When you got to the end of the recapitulation, which, as I've said before, was essentially a restatement of the exposition material, when you got to the end of the recapitulation, the piece is, it's kind of done. That's not what Beethoven did here. At the end of the recapitulation, which ends on this nice little... Because of how he's constructed the theme, it would have sounded odd if it just ended... It just would have been cutting it off too soon. And the way he constructed the theme, it just naturally lends itself to continuation. A little bit different. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wait, I thought we were done. Where is this going? And he just keeps on continuing these unstable chords. It's like, oh, back in familiar territory. And then, so essentially that whole page of that piece is, in music, what you call a coda, or it's Italian for tail. So it's kind of a concluding section to the piece of music. It's not part of the strict sonata form. It's obviously, so if you know what the rules are, you can break them. And you're allowed to break them as long as you do it well, which Beethoven did it exceptionally well. So that's kind of a new element in this piece, is this coda at the end of it, this tail, this conclusion to it. Essentially reusing the same thematic material he's already presented, but doing it in a concluding manner as opposed to a manner which pushes it out into newer territory. The next piece is another one by Beethoven. He wrote this next one earlier than the one I just played. This is one of his better-known piano sonatas. It's in one of a couple he wrote in C minor. It's the commonly known as the Pathetique Sonata. It's Opus 13. The piece I just played is Opus 30-something. So this was written substantially earlier, and this piece was revolutionary in a number of ways. First off, composers could, prior to Beethoven, they could, and they here and there they did have an introduction at the beginning of the piece. So introduction is, it's not the first theme, it's maybe similar material, but it kind of exists in its own thing. And Beethoven, in this piece, has a very lengthy introduction, and what makes it, at least in my mind, so revolutionary for its time, is he brings that introduction back 2 more times, shortened each time. So, the first time you hear the introduction is the longest that it'll be, and then when it comes back at the beginning of the development section, it's shorter, and it's a little bit different, so it leads different places. And then he has a very much shortened version of it come back at the beginning of the recapitulation. So when you hear this, that's the introduction. The first theme is... So very distinctive sounding, very different. The introduction is very slow, very ponderous. This is called the Pathetique. Obviously, literal translation to that would be pathetic, but as in, is it pathos or pathos, Amanda? Pathos as far as Amanda knows. Okay, P-A-T-H-O-S. I don't know how to pronounce the word. Yeah, if anybody's ever said it in front of me, I wasn't paying any attention.
It might be one of those things too, where it's regional.
Oh, could be a regional pronunciation thing. I don't know. We'll go with pathos. Pathos sounds better. Sounds like a Three Musketeers character. Pathos.
Like European versus American.
Okay.
That happens a lot with those kind of
Yeah.
They were talking about schnapps, and it's gonna be pathos.
Fair enough. I don't know how much of that you could hear, but she was talking about European versus American coconuts. Yeah, pronunciation. Schnapps versus schnapps. That's not schnapps. Wait, did I say schnapps? Oh, the Brits say schnapps, right?
Yeah, they say schnapp, but we say
Yeah.
schnapp.
And because the British have a tendency to pronounce every letter, I'm surprised. I pointed this out to Amanda the other night. I'm surprised they don't say schnapps. Because that would be saying every letter. Oh, I see a super chat from Barbara. Thank you so much. And you sent a... We'll go with a limoncello. Not limoncello. Limoncello, because we're musical here. So thank you so much for that support. Appreciate it. I see that Craig is here. Hi, Craig. Glad you're here. Oh, Hunter's here too. Yay. Hi, Hunter. Hunter, I had an idea, and Chris, if you're listening, an idea for a t-shirt that might be kind of cool, and I think Hunter will appreciate that. It would be the character from the very popular new Disney Star Wars TV show, but arranged in kind of a fractal pattern, and he'd have sort of a frat boy look to him, and I'll have a bunch of these t-shirts, and it'll be a Mandalorian set. Huh? Mandabrolorian. Mandelbrolorians. It works. I like it. I thought I was very clever. Although I do admit I had to look up Mandelbro set prior to cementing that joke in my head just to make sure it was what I thought it was, because I'm not super familiar with it. I obviously know what it is, but I'm not super familiar with math stuff. So, anywho, yeah, Mandelbro. Hunter gets it. Good. I'd be worried if he didn't. Let's see. Is anybody else in the join since I last checked? I have no idea. Oh, hi, Dari. No, I did not see that Dari's here. I've been seeing, because since I have my phone sitting here, I've been seeing stuff go, but obviously when I'm playing, it's kind of hard to look at that at the same time. So anyhow, Beethoven. So there's a few surprises in this piece. Like I said, there's this long, slow introduction in the home key in C minor, and then the first theme. Very active, very sort of feel to it. Now, oftentimes in a minor key, the easiest place to modulate for your second theme is here. It's called the relative major. The reason why it's easy is because the only thing that makes the relative major different from the minor key is the note that you start on when you start playing the scale. In other words, C minor is that, E flat major, where you expect it to go, is that. I just played the exact same notes. I just started here instead of here. So it's as you can imagine, it's all the same notes. It's a very easy switch to make. But what Beethoven does in this piece is he surprises us. You get this. You expect to lead there for the second theme, but it doesn't. It does this. So, or an E flat minor, just out of nowhere. And again, this is something that is not commonly done. It would have sounded very revolutionary for its time. It would have been, thrown people for a loop. And then eventually he has another very active theme, but he does have a third theme in here. In E flat major, which is where we expected to land at the beginning of the second theme. And then, as with other sonatas, the exposition section of this repeats. So you'll hear it ending on these big. The introduction is not part of the repetition, so it doesn't go back to this. At the end, you get this. It goes back into the first theme. So that portion repeats. And then in the development section, you'll hear different key, but it's the introductory material again. And then, as with other composers, Beethoven really plays around with bits and pieces of the stuff that he presented in the exposition. You'll know we're back in the recapitulation when, or I'm sorry, the I said earlier the introduction comes back at the beginning of the recapitulation. It doesn't. It's later on. So you'll know we're at the recapitulation when you hear that thing again. Where he brings back the introductory material is at the very end. He uses it as a coda. You get these big crashing chords, and then all of a sudden we have the introduction again, and it's brilliantly done. One of the reasons why this particular work is considered such a work of genius is because he's doing stuff nobody thought of before, and he does it really, really, really effectively. Both in how he crafts and creates his thematic material, the introduction section, and then how he uses those pieces, those bits and pieces of it later on. It's really pretty amazing. So hopefully I'll do it justice. This is the Sonata Pathétique, Opus 13, Piano Sonata number 8 in C minor by Beethoven. First movement. I just saw a comment from Nicole. She thought this was the pathétique that her brother-in-law learned, but that's not true at all. This is intense AF. Yes, it is. Yes, it's also really, really difficult. And that's something else that you see with these later sonatas, these pieces by Beethoven, later time period. Sonatas, from a technical standpoint, are a lot more difficult to play than they were in Mozart. I mean, Mozart wrote some challenging stuff, but Beethoven and Schubert and a few other composers really pushed it forward, and sonatas became much harder pieces to play, especially for those of us who don't play all the time. So, I hope you guys like that one. It's one of my favorites. And let's see, how are we doing on time? I think what I might do, just to make sure that we end on time, I've been toying with the idea of playing the rest of that, but that'll be for another day. There's 2 other movements to that piece. I've played one of them before, actually, if anybody remembers this. It's the second movement. But I actually don't like playing it in this score because of the way it's written. Some of the notes that you're supposed to play with your right hand are written in areas where, if I'm just glancing at the page, I'm inclined to try and play it with my left hand, which I can't do because you can't physically reach it. So the way this version, this score is written is different from the one that I learned it on. I don't know what happened to the one I learned it on, but yeah, the last time I tried playing it on one of these shows, I hadn't really looked at it prior to that, and was in for some rude surprises when the notes were not where I expected them to be on the page. So I'll have to find, before I attempt to play the entire piece, all 3 movements, I'll have to find that other score, the one I originally learned it on that I got used to playing. And I see a super chat from my mom. She says that she is so glad that they insisted that I take piano lessons. This has been such a treat to have you share your knowledge with us. Well, it's been a treat to share it. I mean, this is stuff that, you know, I don't know if I ever officially mentioned on the show, but like Amanda, I was a music major in college. So I studied this stuff for 4 years, and I didn't really seriously start composing and writing my own stuff until long after college. I was in my 30s. But it's all stuff that's been a big part of me, been a big part of my life. And, you know, until Amanda came along, I really didn't have anybody to share it with. And it's been kind of interesting too, because, you know, talking about the structure of these pieces, I've had to really think and remember things. When I'm writing my own music, you know, all of those terms that you learn in college, like, you know, authentic cadence, which is that, I think. There's a plagal cadence, there's a deceptive cadence, there's a whole bunch of terms like that I don't really remember the definitions of anymore. I'd have to look them up again. But they're not something I think about when I'm writing music, or even really when I'm whatever kind of analysis I'm doing on a piece that I'm playing. I'm not thinking about that stuff. I'm thinking in terms of thematic material. Where is this going? Where do I expect it to be going? And does the composer upend those expectations like Beethoven did in those 2 examples I played tonight? Or does the composer kind of stick with the expectation like the earlier ones, you know, Clementi and Kuhlau, where they didn't really do anything too revolutionary in those pieces? And it's especially helpful with a piece like this one. I'm going to hopefully get through it. There's a couple portions of this one I've always had trouble with. It's a sonata, the first movement of a sonata in F minor by Schubert, and Schubert was kind of an interesting composer in that he died at the age of 31, probably syphilis. Nobody really knows totally for sure. He got really, really sick kind of out of nowhere and just died. He wrote a tremendous amount of music. Yeah, his songs alone for piano and voice are, I think, if there's over 600 of them. And yeah, he wrote not 9 completed symphonies, but probably 6 or 7 fully complete, all 4 movements, symphonies, fully orchestrated, all that. He wrote his famous Unfinished Symphony, which is a 2-movement piece, and there's apparently the first few seconds of a third movement exist. The story was that he was writing it for a woman, a maid or somebody like that he was in love with, and when he found out that she was betrothed to somebody else, he rolled the thing up, stuffed it in a drawer, and they didn't find it till after he died. But probably one of the most famous pieces he wrote was the Unfinished Symphony, and just beautifully balanced, just the 2 movements on their own. They don't need anything else. He wrote a lot of piano music. He was a pianist, and his stuff is kind of like Mozart in that it looks deceptively simple on the page. You know, Beethoven, you look at it, there's going to be a lot of black on the page, and you think, okay, yeah, this is tough stuff. You look at Schubert and you think, oh, this isn't so bad. And then you start trying to play it, and it's like he's got some really tricky things that you have to do, you know, finger positions you have to do on the keyboard. Anyhow, he wrote a lot of piano music, and he probably has more unfinished compositions than most composers have finished compositions. Where I'm going with all this is this sonata is one of those unfinished compositions. It consists of 3 movements. He did not finish the first movement. He left it off. He wrote I was talking about earlier, the exposition, development, recapitulation. He wrote the exposition and development of this sonata, and it's a great one. It's one I've loved ever since I first started playing it. And then that's it. The music just kind of tails off at the end of the development, and there's nothing else for that movement. He wrote a complete second movement, which I believe was intended to go with this, with the first movement. And then he wrote a third movement, which I'm not sure that he really fully completed it, but I think he at least wrote, you know, the melody line, kind of the main portions of it, such that somebody else came along and finished it, but they were really just kind of filling in the blanks. The structure was there, the melody line was there, all they had to do was fill in the missing stuff. A lot easier to do when you have that melody, that structure there to begin with, than if the music just tails off into nothing, and you can tell, okay, well, we got 2/3 of it here. What do we do with the other third? Because it's not there. So I have heard a completed version of this piece of music. I've never been able to find a sheet music for that completed version, but as far as I know, whoever completed it followed the strict sonata form. So the missing recapitulation is really just the exposition again, but modified so the different themes stay in the same key instead of going into different keys. What I did with it was a little bit different. So the opening theme, and it's somewhat of an extended theme, the opening theme is... and a restatement. So it's very declamatory. I mentioned briefly earlier the feeling of a motif versus a theme. That's a motif. I mean, it's instantly recognizable as something, but it's not really a complete musical thought. You know, it ends here, and yeah, then he... kind of a complete thought, and then he restates it starting on a different pitch. Where it sounds much more thematic is slightly later, not much, but slightly later when it comes in like this. And so you can see he's changing it, he's doing things with it so he can extend it out and kind of complete that musical thought. So it's a very distinctive opening, and I believe the completed version that I have a recording of somewhere, what they do at the beginning of the recapitulation is the development ends, find the spot, with this. Those triplets were something that Schubert wrote in, so he fully intended that. But then when you get to the recapitulation, that that sort of drive, that flow that's been developing in the development towards the end of it, it just, it's like you just hit this wall, and just as you started to pick up some momentum, you run into this wall. So what I did instead was I skipped that portion of the first theme at the beginning of the recapitulation, and where he extends out the first theme with this figuration, I kept the triplets going instead. So it keeps that momentum going, it keeps that drive going. And then when it gets to the second theme, I then went back to essentially what was in the exposition. So you'll hear kind of a shift, more of a shift with the second theme in the recapitulation than you do in the exposition, if that makes any sense. Hopefully it does. And then what I did was kind of like what Beethoven did in that Pathetique Sonata, that ba-bum, that really distinctive sounding motif. I brought that back at the end of the movement, after all the exposition material is done. Then that comes back, and it's, to me, just feels a much more appropriate place to put it and to bring the piece to a conclusion, as opposed to sticking with the strict sonata form. So this is one of the situations where if you know what the rules are and you know why they are written the way they are, you can break them. And you can, if you do it well, if you have a good reason for doing it, it works. And oftentimes it's a lot better than if you had followed the form of the music strictly. So see how this goes. This is first movement sonata in F minor by Schubert, and completed by me. I will try and remember to do like a big head gesture or nod or something when I get to the portion that I wrote, where Schubert left off. So hope you enjoy it. right, so that was the sonata by Schubert that I finished. I don't know how distinctive my nod was there when I switched over to the part that I wrote, and as I was playing it, I was discovering the portion I wrote, there are a number of typos and other weird things that really threw me for a loop there. Let's see now. Oops, I accidentally closed something I did not mean to close. Now, Sam, I know you said that we had some promos. I think this is probably a good time to do it. I've got one more thing to play after this. Run the promos now, then let's do it. So, as soon as I see one of the slides on the screen, there we go. We got Hunter coming up. Today's Wednesday, so this will be tomorrow night. Lovecast number 72. And I know I'm going to be tuning in. He always has a great show that he puts together. He's always so cool and calm and collected on camera. I don't know how he does it. But definitely tune in for that. He is a fantastic musician, great singer, great guitarist, and it's an hour to an hour and a half of a lot of fun every single time. Then coming up on Saturday, we've got Hearts Fire Cabaret. This is where you, in the audience, get to sign up and show us what you can do. It's a lot of fun. We hope that you join us. We've had, as Amanda said the other night on her show, we've had poetry readings before. We've had short stories. We've had songs, piano pieces, the usual stuff that we see on Polly's Picnic, Polly's online variety show. But you can really, you're free to do whatever you want. There's no limitation, so long as you have clothes on. Darren is the only exception to that. Then next up, we've got an In the Cove, in an actual cove, with Paul and Jamie at 8:30 Saturday evening. And that's always a great hour, or really however long Paul feels like performing stuff. Acoustic music. Hopefully he has a ukulele with him, and they can do some stuff on that too. But he is a great musician, great singer too, and always look forward to his shows. And then coming back after the summer, it's a Sunday night. We have Suggestion Box.
Yes!
That was my reaction too. I saw the graphic for it on YouTube earlier today, and I was like, yeah, I can't wait for that to come back. Fantastic comedians. Looks like we've got Karen Bond, Tom Carosa. Tom Carosa's back. Hooray! Tom Carosa, Jane Brucker, Danny Roquet, Denny Siegel, Dylan White, and hosted by Paul Carganella. And that is, again, about an hour of comedy, improv comedy. It is a fantastic show. These people are absolutely hysterically funny. And I've really been missing them this summer. And then, coming up a week from tonight at 6:30 p.m., Picker Circle with Mike and Nicole Pierce. And I know at least Nicole's watching tonight. I don't know if I haven't seen Mike in the comments, but yeah, Daria, I agree. OMG, Tom is back. Absolutely. And so Mike and Nicole's show is an hour or so of guitar music and singing, and they usually do a few songs. They bring in friends of theirs who perform their own song selections, and it's a great variety of music that people bring to the table. So that's what we have upcoming on Vaudacity, and I skipped over Amanda because there wasn't a graphic for her. Her next show is at 7:30. And Amanda, is there a theme for that show?
Oscillating between a few right now, but I want people to send in
She's oscillating.
I want people to send in some country and rock suggestions because those are definitely coming up.
Okay. So I don't know if you heard her. She said send in country and rock suggestions. www.vaudacity.online is the webpage form where you can submit requests for her show, and she'll sing your requests. If you haven't seen her show before, it is fantastic, and I'm not just saying that because I'm married to her. It is an amazing show. She is an incredible singer and musician, and she just puts together these awesome shows week after week. It's amazing. And I see, thank you, Kelsey. She says, lovely job, friend. See a super chat from Kelsey. Glad to see that you're here. Mike's been driving you crazy, am I right? Kidding. Glad to see that you guys are home, Nicole. Last Picker Circle for a while, possibly. Well, we hope not, but I think we'll understand if it is the last one for a bit. Diana is asking, what's the theme this week? Is that
That's why I'm asking
reference?
for those couple suggestions.
Okay, Diana, if that's in reference to Amanda's show, that's why she's asking for country and rock
So I
suggestions,
can figure out.
so she can figure out a possible theme around that style of music. So if you have suggestions, send them on in. Okay, last song I'm doing tonight, piece of music, is one of my own compositions. I opened and closed the show with my own stuff. So this one, in keeping with the rest of the show, I titled it Sonatina, mostly because I feel like it is a little bit simpler in conception than a full-blown sonata would be. It's not shorter. It's actually about the same length overall if you take all three movements. About the same length as some pieces by Beethoven and Mozart and a few others. Versus your standard sonatina, which is typically much shorter. You know, a full sonata might be 15 or 20 minutes long. A sonatina might be like 5 or 7 minutes long, to give you an idea. It's much shorter usually. So I called this sonatina. It's really, it borders on being a full sonata. And you'll hear, I don't know that anybody will remember, but the Kulau piece I played at the beginning, the opening of my sonatina owes a lot to that Kulau. It's C minor instead of C major, but it's... And after that, the similarities end, but it's a very similar opening theme. And this is part of those preludes I mentioned at the beginning that were originally conceptualized to teach to Amanda's piano students. This is part of that set of pieces. This is a three-movement piece. I wrote each individual movement such that they can be played all one after the other, or they can be played individually. And given our time constraints here, I'm going to go a little bit past 9, but I won't get to play the whole thing, so I'll do that someday. So this one, the opening theme, that's the opening first theme, C minor. The second theme is E flat major and sounds like this. I'll find where it is. Oh, sorry, wrong spot. So that's the second theme. And then there is a third theme that comes in. It's really, the way I constructed this, it just kind of wrote itself this way. Just what sounded right is what I mean by that. Where you have a third theme. Let's see if I can find a good spot to start it. Here. Sudden we're back in the second theme again, which is not something that a lot of composers will do, is to introduce a third theme and then suddenly flip back one theme and present the second one again. And in this case, the second theme really it's not totally complete. It is somewhat complete, but it leads in a different direction at the end of it. It leads straight into the development section, which instead of going where it goes in the beginning of the piece, goes to this totally different key and then ends up down here. And then after the development section, you'll hear in the recapitulation, you hear the first theme again, but it's going to be different. Instead of, it's exactly the same notes, but this time the accompaniment, what the left hand is doing, is way up here. So it's... So it gives it a totally different character, totally different sound, and it really helps lead into the extension of the first theme that you hear in the beginning of the piece and you hear again in the recapitulation, because it creates this very unstable feeling. You're sitting way up here and you kind of feeling like the bottom's dropped out a bit, And it gives an opportunity to make that bottom coming back in, so to speak, make that more dramatic entrance when those lower notes do come back. Uh, so anyhow, without further ado, I think those are all the interesting points of this particular piece. This is the Prelude number 9, C minor, first movement of my sonatina by me. Hey y'all! Actually looking at the right camera this time. It's kind of nice actually having the camera up here. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show tonight. That was the last one I had, and certainly enjoyed presenting all this material. It was obviously a lot of work to put together, to decide what to play and then finding time to practice it, because a lot of these things I haven't played in a very long time, much to my detriment, I think. There's good stuff in here. So anyhow, let's see if there's anything else. Oh, there's a Susan Kuhn, Kuhn. I haven't seen you in the chat before, so hello, welcome. Hope you enjoyed the show. And I thought I saw somebody. Oh no, it was Kelsey that I had seen. There's a super chat though. Oh, from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. And it's I'm guessing it's a Roman lemon because he's got the leaves around his head. Yeah, definitely Roman lemon. He's got a trophy or something? It sparkles. I don't know, maybe it's supposed to be hair. I'm very confused. Well, let's see. No, it's holding... I don't know what he's holding. Nicole, what is this little guy holding? I don't know what it is. He's holding something, which he loves, and it's sparkly, which is cool. It's a baby lime?
Yes. I thought it was a pear because it had the little knob.
Oh, it's a baby lime. See, I'm looking at my phone screen. It's like this big.
Yeah, on my phone.
I can't tell at all. So anyhow, thank you for joining me tonight. Appreciate you guys being here. It's a lot of fun to do these shows. And stay tuned next month sometime, probably around 3-4 weeks from now. It has been requested that I do some Halloween type music, so I think I'm going to figure out some Halloween stuff to do. For instance, and remember what I was saying earlier about a motif? Well, that sure as hell is a motif. Well, another one of the most well-known ones ever written. So stay tuned. We'll let you know when the next show is going to be. It'll be Halloween music. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the show, and you'll get those notifications. So that is it for tonight. Thanks, everybody.